Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. These can be issues to do with agriculture and food security, to do with religion, to do with mining, to do with tourism and other facets of life. We look at them in order to see what economic benefits we can derive from them. My name is John Masugu. Today we want to talk about Zimbabwe and intra-Africa trade. What are we benefiting from other African countries? We've heard of SADC, the Southern African Development Community. What is it that we're benefiting from other SADC countries? We've heard about Comesa, the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa. Again, what are we benefiting from there? Is there anything that is coming from West Africa through ECOWAS or from East Africa through the East African Community? All that you're going to hear from our guest today, who is Chido Pamela Mafongoya, and trade and investment lawyer. Chido, welcome to Economic Forum. Now, the first thing is, where are we in Zimbabwe? I mentioned all those different organizations, but are we a member of all of them? Are we in ECOWAS? No, it's for Western Africa. Tell us more.
Zimbabwe currently belongs to 3 regional blocs, mainly the Southern African Development Community, that is SADC, and we also have Comesa. I think those are the 2 regional blocs that Zimbabwe belongs to at the moment. We are unfortunately not a part of ECOWAS, neither are we a part of EAC.
Yes.
So those are the regional blocs that Zimbabwe belongs to.
Yes. Now, what is it that we are sending to those blocks, and what are we receiving in turn? For example, within SADC, what is it that Zimbabwe is offering in terms of trade, and what is it really that we're benefiting from other countries?
All right, so in terms of SADC, I think, as we all know, Zimbabwe is, its export area mainly is agricultural produce. So that is your tobacco, your cocoa, your cotton. I think that is the main, that's our main leg in the economy. So when you get to see with SADC, there are different kind of benefits which Zimbabwe can attract, or which Zimbabwe is attracting from SADC. There are the economic benefits in terms of trade. So with SADC, you see that there is more or less free trade, in that there is the trade barriers have now been removed within the SADC countries, which makes your exporting much easier and much cheaper for Zimbabwe. So that's one of the ways we're benefiting. The other ways is through even the movement of people. I think you'll notice within the SADC region, it's less onerous for you to move between the different countries. For instance, I don't require a visa to travel to South Africa. That's one of the benefits of being within the SADC region. While if someone from Nigeria actually needs a permit just to get into South Africa. So you see that that also helps in terms of trading of our entrepreneurs in different companies. We also have, even with our fiscal environment, where the SADC region does offer, a port where that Zimbabwe can, sort of borrow money, or sort of, when it's not in a proper economic situation, it could also get money from that port. So there are various ways within the SADC region is provided ways in which Zimbabwe can trade on less onerous terms, which is the whole point really of having a regional bloc.
But having said that, Chido, how come we are leaving all these opportunities that you're talking about and going east, going to Dubai, going to China and so forth? Are people aware of these opportunities, especially the barriers that have been removed, so that you can trade with South Africa, with Botswana, with Lesotho, if you can trade with Lesotho and Swaziland easily?
Mm-hmm. I think it has 2 aspects to it. I think the first thing is, whilst we do have, because if you check the economy of Zimbabwe, it's mostly made up of SMEs. So 60% of our economy really is the SMEs. So most of the SMEs, there is part on the SMEs that people are also not knowledgeable of the benefits that are offered by regional blocs such as SADC. So some of it is attributed to the lack of knowledge, really, I think, which is a part on our stakeholders or our policymakers who are not making this information available to entrepreneurs within our country. But to some extent, whilst we can have people who are aware, some of the things comes to do with economies of scale. You will see that in SADC region, most of our exports or our inputs pretty much the same. So you see in South Africa, they are also heavily on agriculture. And Zimbabwe is also heavily on agriculture. Zambia might be a little bit different because with their minerals, they have a lot of coal, which we might not have in Zimbabwe. So some of the problem is that while people might feel the need to go out of SADC is because of economies of scale. There are different kind of products that are offered in Nigeria, in Egypt, in different countries that are not a part of SADC. So we are then forced to go out of the SADC area to trade with other countries or other countries belonging to a different regional bloc.
Maybe you want to differentiate SADC and Comesa so that our viewership understands the difference, what they can get through SADC, what they can get through Comesa.
Yes, so the first difference is that with the SADC, it's countries within the southern region, while with Comesa, we have countries within the southern region and within the eastern region. So you will have some countries in East Africa which are not catered for within SADC. And also Comesa provides a custom union, which is not necessarily the same with SADC. With the custom union, trade is more liberal. So you get that there is just, minus just removing the trade barriers, there are also the non-trade barriers that are offered within the Comesa region. The Comesa region also looks at harmonizing the movement of people. It looks at also providing, the SADC region looks at harmonizing the movement of people and peace and security, which is not necessarily provided for within the Comesa region. So the Comesa region is more or less to do a lot with the monetary unions and the fiscal environment of how we trade within the members within Comesa.
Okay, Chido, having said that, I'm also reminded about the PTA. Does it still exist? There used to be the PTA or preferential trade area. We even had travelers' checks when you were traveling outside the country. You'd get it from that bank or from that bank or even from the PTA bank, but I've not heard about it in a long time. Does it still exist?
Unfortunately, it actually no longer exists. It's now defunct and was in fact replaced by Comesa.
Yes.
So I think due to various factors, with issues of regional blocs, there's a lot of issues that come into play, which is why you see even with the European Union, we've had the UK, breaking off from the EU. It comes a lot to do with issues of sovereignty, issues of the fiscal environment of that particular country, issues of not wanting to give up certain elements, issues with different kinds of economies. You see that some economies are more stronger than other economies. Within SADC, we have South Africa and Nigeria, which are one of the most strongest economies within Africa. But what happens to a country like Zimbabwe? Sometimes you get to see that within the trade areas, while we have elimination of trade barriers, some countries stand to lose out as compared to the bigger economies.
That's Chido Pamela Mafongoya, who is a trade and investment attorney, discussing with us here about intra-Africa trade, the different organizations that we have and where Zimbabwe is placed in those organizations and also those functions. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing intra-Africa trade. What is it that Zimbabwe is benefiting from other African countries? We know we are a member of SADC, we're a member of Comesa, but there's also ECOWAS, which is for West Africa. Are we benefiting from there? There's also the East African Community. Are we benefiting from there in addition to what we get through Comesa, which also embraces East Africa? And to discuss all that, we've got a trade and investment attorney, Chido Pamela Mafongoya. Now, Chido, let's look at other areas. One of the most important being what you call the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Quite a mouthful, but you want to unpack that. What is it and what is it that we benefit as Zimbabwe? And if we have it, why then SADC and Comesa?
The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, popularly known as the AfCFTA of the AfCFTA, is the game changer for Africa right now. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, as the name suggests, is a free trade area, which is the largest free trade area that has ever been established after the World Trade Organization. So the Africa Free Trade Area is basically a regional bloc which allows trading amongst African countries. So it is one of the missions of the African Union, and it's in fact one of the established by the African Union on the basis of Africa's forefathers, your Kwame Nkrumah, who had a dream to unite Africa, to unite trading in Africa, to ensure that Africa benefits from each other, and to ensure that Africa is strengthened within trading. So basically the AfCFTA eliminates trade barriers within Africa. It also speaks on the free movement of people. Eventually what it is supposed to happen is that Africans are going to be using one passport, where you can travel within Africa without any sort of visa needed. It will be just free movement. So I can go from here to Egypt without worrying, do I have an Egyptian visa, or do I need to apply for a visa in Morocco, which is what is going to eventually happen. So it's been happening in phases. We have different protocols which govern various things. So we have your intellectual protocol, your trade and services protocol. We have different protocols that will cover various things within the AfCFTA.
Maybe you can also add some more information on what they are, these protocols, and what we benefit by having such protocols.
The protocols are basically the agreements that will govern how countries will trade amongst each other. So for instance, if you have your trade and services, where countries are trading are trading services, how are those services being traded, and how do we ensure that we protect the local economy? How do we ensure that we protect the rules of origin? Where was this product made? And how do we ensure that that country gets what it's supposed to get in terms of the rules of origin? So there are a number of things that are then covered under the AfCFTA. Fortunately, Zimbabwe is now a member of the Africa Free Trade Area, which is very exciting. So we hope that Zimbabwe will be able to strategically place itself in order to take full advantage of all the protocols that are provided for the investment protocol under the Africa Free Trade Area. However, as you can see, this is one of the largest trading areas, and it's involving almost all the countries. I think there are only a few countries which have not ratified the agreement. So I think with that, you can already tell it's going to bring a lot of challenges, given that countries which are already trading in the AfCFTA are already a part of some other regional bloc. So there are also a lot of challenges that will come with that.
Chido, the other thing is we talk about all these organizations and how we can benefit as Zimbabweans, but maybe what is also important is to say, how do you get to them? Because if, for instance, I'm a business person, I want to get involved in SADC, what do I do? In Comesa, what do I do? Where do I go to? As well as this trade area that you're talking about.
I think it's very important for entrepreneurs to visit various sites. The African Union does have a site where it provides information about what the AfCFTA is and how we can take full advantage of it. Even within Zimbabwe, you can go to the Ministry of Trade and Foreign Investment and find out more about the AfCFTA. Various articles have also been written on the internet, if you check, and in the newspapers, of how you as an entrepreneur at home can actually, what does it mean for you? Basically, what it means for you is that trade has been made easier. When you perhaps had to pay $200 in tax, you are now paying $50 because Zimbabwe is a member of the AfCFTA. So there are various things that are provided for, even with the movement of people, as I've mentioned. Eventually, we're all going to have one African passport where you can cross within countries, so that trade is even made more easier. Your trade and services, we have various non-trade barriers, which have been abolished because of the Africa Free Trade Area.
Do you know of any outreach programs? We were talking about visiting their sites and so forth, which is not easy for everyone.
Yes.
I'm out there in Kutu or Rubane, and my internet is very difficult to access and so forth. Are there any outreach programs by the ministry or other bodies to reach those ordinary people and tell them about the opportunities that are available?
Unfortunately, I have not heard of any. But I think it's something that our ministries and stakeholders must really look into, because looking at trade is one of the biggest ways in which Zimbabwe is actually increasing its GDP. According to the United Nations, the AfCFTA has the potential of increasing Zimbabwe's GDP to more than 14%, which I think is quite a significant sum. So these are things that are actually very paramount to the economy. They are paramount to business people. They are paramount to entrepreneurs. And I think more should be done by our necessary stakeholders to ensure that there's some sort of access to information. Because for the ordinary man down the street, they probably wouldn't even know what is the AfCFTA.
That's Chido Pamela Mafongoya, who is a trade and investment attorney, telling us about trade or inter-trade in Africa, some of the benefits we get from different organizations, in particular the all-embracing one that she's just been talking about, that is called the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which embraces the whole continent. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where our guest is Chido Pamela Mafongoya, who has been telling us about intra-African trade, starting off with SADC, what we're benefiting from there, as well as Comesa, and the free trade area, which was formed under the Organization of African Unity, which is now called the AU, or the African Union. I think we've long forgotten about that Organization of African Unity. But what makes me remember OAU is that the founding fathers of what we now call the AU did mention that we want to free our countries from political dominance by the Western countries, but at the same time, we also want to make sure that we have that independence with regards to our economies. Maybe our attorney here, Chido, can unpack that so that those who may have missed that part of history can understand where we're coming from as Africa.
I think it is important to mention that it has always been Africa's forefathers, Kwame Nkrumah and the others. Their dream has always been to unite Africa, because at the end of the day, Africa has everything it needs. If you look at our different economies, our different countries, we are so diverse. And at the end of the day, there is no need for Africa really to rely on the West or to rely on the EU. This is the dream that Kwame Nkrumah had for Africa, and it has now been manifested through the AfCFTA. So his dream in also building relations between Africa, the whole idea is that we go back to the economies of scale. While Zimbabwe may have maize, Ghana has cocoa. If we trade and each country is given an opportunity to maximize the economies of scale, if I can have maize and add value production to the maize, which would then result to roller meal and all of this and all of this. If Ghana has its cocoa, it manages to have value addition from that, produces it into chocolate, coffee and whatnot. We then export that out of Africa. And in turn, Africa is now getting foreign currency and everything that it needs to then advance its interests, as opposed to Africa trading in raw materials. Yet we lose everything. We are the ones with the minerals. We are the ones with the diamonds. In Sierra Leone, we have our diamonds, but we're not processing them. So we stand to lose a lot by us trading raw materials, and then the West, in turn, sells it back. They sell back our products, now just processed. So the whole idea also of the AfCFTA is that when countries begin to trade, it then increases our income. That then can turn our countries to then invest into the infrastructure, invest into the kind of processing machines that we need to then turn our raw materials into finished products. So I think it's up to us, even as the youth, because as we all know, Africa is made up, 60% of Africa is the youth. So it's even up to us, the youth. What are we doing with the raw materials that we have? What are we doing with the things that we're farming in our farms? We have to take advantage of what our forefathers had taught us, that Africa, we are united, we are one people. If we work together, we have the potential to actually be the most powerful continent on the world.
Chido, thank you very much for clarifying that, especially the dream or the dreams of our forefathers, Kwame Nkrumah, NASA, Haile Selassie, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, and so forth, when they formed the Organization of African Unity, which is now the AU. But one thing that we are seeing with regards to these organizations doing intra-trade, as soon as they finish their conferences, be they SADC, be they Comesa or the free trade area, there is also some side conferences where they have to, those who were under France are also meeting to see how they can do their things. Those who were under Britain are not there. And those under Britain are also brought together and so forth. Now, at the end of the day, my question is, are these organizations independent as African organizations as was wished by our forefathers?
I think at the moment we still have a long way to go. I would say we're not yet where our forefathers wanted us to be. For Africa to stand on its feet, it has to be independent. Because when you then rely on foreign influence, your objectives are then skewed. You are inclined to go a certain way. So I think as Africa, this one is more or less a political issue maybe, or I don't know what kind of assistance or what kind of realization we need to come to as Africa, because it will also then impact on our trading relations. For us to then stand on our own, we need to make sure that our decisions are independent of any foreign influence. Because at the end of the day, I feel like Africa is the one who has it all. In fact, we are the ones who need to call the shots, not the other way around, because we are the ones with all the raw materials. So in fact, we need to realize as Africans, as African leaders, that we are the ones who need to call the shots. And when we realize that, we begin to make decisions independent of any influence, which will benefit the whole Africa at large.
If Chido, Pamela, Mafongoya was invited to the next AU summit just to say a few points, let's say 3 or 4, about what you have just said, where we need our independence, where even our headquarters does not have to be built by a foreign country, but by ourselves, and funding is coming from African countries and so forth. What is it that you would advise the 54 or so heads of state?
My first point of advice would be that Africa, let's change our mindset. It starts with the mindset. We are independent. The fact that all African countries, there's no African country which is under colonialization. We are already at another stage. The last stage now, we need to remove ourselves completely of any thinking that there's a dependence. You know, Africans, we have a dependency kind of syndrome. We want to depend on someone. We want to depend on foreign investments. We want to, so long we have that mentality, even the objectives of the AfCFTA, they will not be satisfied. We have got to stand on our feet. Even though we stumble, you know, when a baby starts walking, he or she may stumble. It's normal. We may stumble here and there. But what we need to realize is Africa has everything it ever needed. We actually don't need anything.
That's Chido Pamela Mafongoya, who has been our guest today on Economic Forum, where we're discussing intra-Africa trade among African countries. We're looking at regional blocs. We looked at the free trade area. We looked at the relationship with other international organizations, and we looked at trade wars. That's all about trade that we need to understand, and all that remains is for me to thank our trade and investment attorney, Chido Pamela Mafongoya. If you'd like to engage with us, you can do so on the social media platforms that are also showing on your screen. If you have missed some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can actually watch them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So, on behalf of the production crew and Chido, this is John Masugu wishing you happy viewing.